everyone. If you were here last year, I got my dates mixed up, and so as Calamity Jane would say in Deadwood, I apologize. It was really bad. That was the worst thing I've done in like forever. So anyhow, without any further ado, let's talk about prostitution and the Wild West Colorado style. Woo! My basic premise is that Colorado was not settled by temperate, well-adjusted people. So here's a picture from Denver, which is actually where I was born, and you'll see these young ladies in the doorway. Well, they were soliciting, okay? And this is on Market Street, and you'll see the more the centuries change, the more the years change. Details change a little bit, but not so much. People still ride their bicycle in mud and snow. Women are still probably propositioning guys, but usually it's at a bar and stuff. So probably the old madams would say everything was just fine, except women were giving it away for free. So when we think about settling the Colorado Territory and who is doing the settling, it's kind of important to look at the statistics. Colorado's first census was taken in 1860, and there was 32,654 people of all ages, okay? So 31,077 of them were men, okay? That gives you 1,577 females, and that could include infants, okay? So there weren't enough dance partners to go around, but it gets worse. So that gives you an overall ratio of 20-1, men aged 20 to 30. There were 17,600 of them to 520 females in the same age bracket. Okay? Now you have a ratio of 34-1. Men aged 30 to 40, there was 10,500 of them to 278 women in the same age categories. That's a ratio of 38-1. So when I started working on my first book, which was Market Street Madam, or The Beaten Territory, same book, I know the descendants of Annie Ryan, which is how I started getting interested in who were these women, why did they make these choices, and what was life really like. Then I was being kind of a jackass at a writers' conference, and Paul Bonifield's a member there. And one of the editors is like, who are you and where are you from? And I'm like, oh, my name's Randi Samuelson-Brown, I'm from Colorado, we used to be bad and we're proud of it. She's like, I want to talk to you. And so what ended up happening is we took a lot of the research I'd done for the historical fiction book and put it into the Bad Old Days of Colorado. So when I was starting to do the Bad Old Days of Colorado, I'm like, what was I told all the time growing up that turned out to be true or not true? So I always heard there were a lot more men than women. So I was looking at it going, is this true? Yes, this is definitely true. I was also told, being from Colorado, we don't lie. We always do the right thing. That turned out to be untrue. So here's a picture of a drunk kiosk, downtown Denver. We had so many drunk people that the police officers got tired of hauling them in, so they built these kiosks on street corners. And they would just stuff the guys in there if they were drunk, and maybe they'd remember to let them out, and maybe they wouldn't. So there's a problem. These things are stifling hot in the summer and freezing cold in the winter. They do figure that probably somebody passed away in one of these, but we don't honestly know. So when alcohol came west, you know, it all had to be hauled in, especially if it was going to be good stuff like whiskey. Okay, so watered down whiskey went twice as far or 3 times as far as an undiluted barrel, right? And so when you start doing your research, you realize that a drink costs 25 cents, which sounds like a fair amount, you know, like that's cheap, who cares? Well, that really equates to about $7 of today's money, so it's not really so cheap in then dollars. So bogus whiskey was made with raw ethyl alcohol. They would add tobacco juice, gunpowder, prune juice, tree bark, molasses, sagebrush, strychnine, turpentine, creosote, or rattlesnake heads for taste. And I'm really not kidding. So what are Old Western names for liquor? Scamper juice, Ice Burner, Bottled Courage, Bug Juice, Calabogus, Clinch Mountain, Coffin Varnish, Corn Juice, Cowboy Cocktail, Dead Shot, Dynamite, Family Disturbance, Fire, Water, and 40 Rod. So I have a story about 40 Rod here. So the whiskey was often made with 2 barrels of water and a few plugs of tobacco, with a quantity of camphor, which I didn't put on the previous sheet, and a little strychnine to give it a tang, to 1 barrel of pure whiskey, which would make 3 barrels of red-eye. When the 40 Rod got near the bottom of the barrel, it was so dangerous that a man sometimes dropped dead from the effect of a few glasses, having too much tang near the bottom of the barrel. Signed, Robert Kirkpatrick, 1863. So when you're drinking, I mean, if you think about all these young men, we saw the statistics who came out here, they didn't necessarily have wives with them, they didn't have their mothers with them, they didn't have their sisters with them. They were just out here looking for gold, right, for the most part. And so what do you do if you're bored, right, because nights are long and cold? You either drink or you can gamble and drink, and here are some gambling halls. This one is in Leadville. And they used to call it bucking the tiger. So Pharaoh was the king of all games, and this was played with a single deck of cards. Roulette was a popular one, poker, and something called chuck-a-luck. And all I can tell from that is there was 3 dice and a bird cage involved. So I think they threw the dice in the bird cage and did whatever, and I don't know. But in a way, it really doesn't matter because they were all suckers' games. There were various shell games, including Soapy Smith's money-laden soap bars. Does everybody know who Soapy Smith is? Does anybody know who Soapy Smith is? He does. Paul is like a ringer. So anyhow, Soapy Smith was a con man down in Denver, and what he used to do is he'd put money in bars of soap, right? And then he'd have one of his friends standing in the crowd, you know, and everybody probably needed soap because they were dirty from like working and stuff, and they're like, hey, do you want to buy some soap? Well, no, they don't really, but one of the friends would like, get the bar of soap with like the $5 gold piece or the silver dollar coin. It's like, oh my God, I got it. So all these people would start buying these bars of soap, and none of them ever really got any money unless you already knew them. So once again, not a good bet. So, you've had an evening, you're drinking, you're gambling. I guess women are the next point of conversation. Let me hand out a couple things here. Okay, so this is just one block of Market Street in Denver. And anytime you see a Sanborn fire map and it says female boarding on it, it's not the East Coast version of boarding, it's prostitution, okay? Female boarding equals prostitutes. So Denver at given times probably had, I've seen estimates of up to 1,000, I really doubt that, but I mean they had a few hundred. So what could be expected on a brothel visit? This is a picture of the inside of the Fortune Club in Victor, Colorado, which used to be a brothel. So, the customer side of the equation, you'd be looking at high-priced drinks. Beer that normally costs 5 cents would all of a sudden cost $1. Whiskey that normally cost 25 cents would cost $1, and that was considered value pricing just because of a lower markup. Once again, I don't know what you were actually drinking, whether it was creosote and raw ethyl alcohol or what. It would probably depend on the type of the establishment you went into. Now, if you're in a brothel and you think you're safe, don't bet on that. It depends, once again, on what type of establishment you were in. If you were in the most expensive ones, you probably were somewhat safe because Madam had a reputation built into her business where she wanted to be known as top class, higher class. So therefore, it doesn't do great to have your watch go missing and have that hit the newspapers if you're a higher class place. People, as you start going down though, start getting less particular about the details, right? So keep that in mind. So there were also health issues. a lot of women had diseases. One of the earliest physicians in Denver figured out that, or he estimated that 3/4 of the men had syphilis in Denver. Once again, I think that was an overestimate, but you never know. So crime. In the lesser houses, you could, if you were drunk, lose your money, you could lose your watch, you could lose your watch chain, you could die because somebody was jealous and came in. There are instances of prostitutes killing customers and other customers killing customers. It wasn't really a safe occupation to, well, way to spend the evening. So, types of theft. So, believe it or not, there were really 3 types of theft that would come in a brothel, other than the girl just stealing like your watch or whatever, your money. So, one guy was called a creeper. This was considered the highest rung of criminality in the brothel. And what a creeper would do is when the woman took her customer up to her room, they never locked their doors for safety reasons, right? So if somebody started beating up a woman, she could yell, they could come in and help. Well, what would happen is this creeper would creep along the floor when they were busy, and he would rifle through the man's pockets. This was considered a skill set, a very strong skill set to not get caught. And then he'd creep back out. Everything was fine, the guy's wallet would be missing, but you know, who knew? A panel man or girl, they used to have wainscoting in a lot of the old buildings, and you could easily hollow out like one of the slats if you were small enough. So you put it, I don't see any records of kids, but you could put in a smaller person behind one of these slats. People are busy, come out of the woodwork literally, come crawling over, go through people's pockets, take whatever you want. Now the next one is the hook artist, and this one is my favorite. So a lot of the old buildings in Denver have the transoms over the window for ventilation, especially in the summer. So this person would kind of stand out in the hallway with a hook and a fishing pole, like you would like out of the street. So what the deal was is the girl would make sure that her customer put his pants on a very specific chair in a very specific place. So while they're busy, all of a sudden the guy like hooks, you know, goes in through the transom with his hook and pulls the pants out back through the transom, and then goes through the pockets and then throws it back over the transom, and then when everything was finished, you know, the guy's like, why are my pants on the floor? I didn't leave my pants here. And the woman would be just as amazed as he was. So here are some pictures of madams. They're kind of surprising. When I started the book, I really wanted the madams to look like Miss Kitty and Gunsmoke. That is really what I wanted. But that was really not to be if I was going to be historically accurate. So the large lady at the top, his name is Lou Bunch. She was the main madam in Central City. She actually ended up leaving the life going straight and became a paid companion to a wealthy woman in Denver. And she's buried in Fairmount Cemetery under her own name next to the lady. So that's kind of a success story, but she was a large woman and she was from Sweden. Maddie Silks is in the middle. She is probably our most famous madam. And, you know, there's all sorts of wild stories about Maddie Silks, but I think probably the most wild one is she said she was never a prostitute. She said at the age of 14 years old, she came west, you know, from Missouri with a wagon train hauling prostitutes with tents to service people along the way, but yet she had never been a prostitute. Now, most 14-year-old girls wouldn't know to do that, really, unless they knew something else. But she stuck to that story to her death. And there is an interview in the Denver Post in the 1950s where she vehemently still insisted she'd never been a prostitute, and her girls made excellent wives for ranchers. So all you ranchers out there, just think about this. I don't know where she got that idea, but anyhow, and then there's Jenny Rogers. She was the classiest one, so to speak, out of these women. And when I started the research, I thought, oh yeah, these women had a code of conduct, right? So I figured they would keep their customers secret, and they had something called a black book, you know, so they'd have like, their particulars. Well, Jenny decided she wanted the finest brothel west of the Mississippi. And so she went to all the men in her black book saying, do you want to be an investor in my brothel? Well, surprise, surprise, a lot of them didn't really want to do that. And she's like, well, if you don't do that, you will be sorry. So the people who didn't do that, she had their likeness carved in sandstone and put it on the eaves of the outside of the brothel in Denver. So when you drive by, you can see these faces to this day. And at the time, people would be like, oh, there's Joe. I didn't know he was one of Jenny's customers. So much for tact. And here's another madam. This one is Mae Phelps out of Trinidad. She liked to get her picture taken. Altman Studios did a fine job for her down there, so every few years she'd have a picture taken. She actually is kind of pretty interesting. She had enough political clout within Trinidad to have them reroute the streetcar line, because the streetcar line was originally going to not go through the red light district. So it was just going to bring the men in from the mines and whatever on the Saturday night, straight to downtown. She had enough clout to get them to reroute it to go right through the red light district. That said, she was also somewhat civic-minded in that she did establish a home for aging prostitutes. And I forget what the name of the town is, something like Hanson outside of Trinidad. And it actually existed through into the 1930s. So, back to the brothel visit. So we already know what the customer's expecting. He's gonna pay a lot of money and he might pay everything he's got in his pockets, right? So one way or another. So the madam side of the equation, she has a different slant on all of this. She has to pay fines for her girls, for her establishment, for her customers when anything gets out of hand. She has to pay licenses to run a brothel, to sell liquor, and she also has to pay graft to the local police department. So the police in Denver especially, they were not upstanding people. That's how we started hearing a lot of these stories, actually, was from the people who are descendants. And, it's kind of shocking because I was always like, the police are like, being from Colorado, we say the right thing, we do the right thing, we're honest. Well, the police weren't even honest back in those days, right? So a woman has a house or a brothel to run. And so what that means is she has to make sure all these girls are fed, the laundry has to be done, the house has to be cleaned, she has to hire bouncers, she has to hire piano players, she has to hire the girls and make sure that they're fit to work and somewhat happy. So that's kind of a tall order. And then customers to handle. A lot of those guys would be really drunk, they'd get in fights and they'd start breaking stuff. In the early days, everything had to be hauled out by wagon. Somebody breaks a mirror, that's actually a big deal. Somebody breaks a window, it's a big deal. So, the wages for women, say in the 1890s, if you were considered an honest woman, your wages weren't really good. You'd get about $6 per week working really more as a retail clerk. Laundress would probably get a little bit less. $4 a week rent was common. So that gives you $2 to feed and clothe yourself a week. If you were going to go the Scarlet Light route, your wages of sin would pay you about $10 to $20 per week, kind of in an inferior establishment. If you were like in one of the better brothels or the parlor houses or gold camps that just hit a strike and money is just pouring out of the ground, you could get $40 to $175 a week. So you see there's a large difference. And the madam would be taking half of whatever you were paid, and she would also charge you for your clothing. So if you wanted fine dresses, you could have them, but she'd put them on you'd put it on her account. She'd pay the bill, but she'd charge you interest. So a lot of times women were sort of indebted to the house, a debt which would be forgiven if all of a sudden you started getting older and weren't as attractive. Then she didn't really want you, so you'd start coming down the rung of establishments you're going to work at. So, as you can see from the pictures passing around, These women do not look like Miss Kitty. The madams don't look like Miss Kitty. And one of the worst things was I really wanted them to have beautiful dresses. And I think maybe in the parlor houses they did. But most of the women wore what was called a brothel gown, which is a white dress that kind of looks like Lance of Austria. So it wasn't what we would consider sexy, but that's what they wore. Here's some pictures of some soiled doves. The one on the left is Laura Bullion. She was the girlfriend of the tall Texan who was part of the Wild Bunch of Butch Cassidy fame. Hung out in Browns Park part of the time, just up the road, right? The middle one is a stage photograph of a woman who is apparently repenting her bad choices in life. And then the third one is actually a photograph I saw on eBay, and I would have loved to buy it, but I think it ended up going for about $250. And that just kind of made me happy that even in death, 100 and some years later, this woman could still command a pretty good price. So I'm like, all right. So the girls' side of the equation. So the girls were the lowest rung in this whole mess. That's just how it works. The hierarchy. Okay, parlor house, you have nice surroundings. Everything's pretty good. Your food's good, place is clean, people do your laundry, you got decent clothes, probably you're in hock for it, but you know, things are going pretty good. You get a little bit older or people start to get tired of you. What do? You change your name, knock off a few years, and go up to the mountains. So there was kind of a circle that would run from Denver up to Cripple Creek, Central City. Central City actually came earlier, but you get the picture. People were moving. This was not a permanent occupation. And so when I was trying to write about prostitutes and really do good research, it was next to impossible because I'd find one, I'd understand who they are, what their name is, kind of what they look like, and they would poof, disappear. And then I'd look through Leadville newspapers and I'd be like, ooh, that kind of looks like so-and-so. Age didn't work, name didn't work, situation didn't work. They didn't want to be found. They didn't want their families back east to know what they were doing, right? So it makes it really hard. So time was not your friend. Your rates went down as you got older. Pregnancy and disease. Yes, these women did get pregnant. A lot of times if they didn't get an abortion and they carried the child to term, they'd get farmed out to relatives who lived wherever. One woman in Denver, her name was Amy Bassett, her son went to Yale on the wages of sin. So, you know, there was all sorts of things going on, but once again, she was a madam. She started out as a working girl, but, you know, these women, the books were stacked against them. If they got tips, they'd be smart to keep it quiet, to keep all your money. But otherwise, whatever the house took, they got half of it. They would have fees put on what the madam said they owed the house, whether it was true or not. I don't think they had a whole lot of room to argue, because if you really pissed the madam off, you'd be out on the street, or you'd be looking for another job, which isn't maybe that big of a deal, but one interesting thing that I never think about is in the 1880s, 1870s, food was a rare commodity. It's not like it is today, going to Safeway and just getting stuff. You had to manufacture the food. So, going on a tangent, if you stole horses and you got sent to prison, or if you killed somebody and got sent to prison, the sentences today would seem very light, 1 year or 2 years. Why was that? Because the people felt offended by having to feed people who had committed crimes, because they looked at food as a reward or an incentive. So it's kind of a thing to think about. Threat of addiction. A lot of these women ended up alcoholics or drug addicts. Sad. Colorado has always had a lot of booze and a lot of drugs. Nothing's changed. They didn't have a lot of friends or close associates, so they were just kind of on their own, because every woman you were working with was competition. She got the money or you got the money, right? So it was a rough way to go. Drugs for cosmetic purposes. So you still wanted to be attractive, and we didn't know a lot about medicine, for example. So belladonna, out of the nightshade family, dilated the pupils to give bedroom eyes. It also caused blindness when used too often. Arsenic wafers contributed to the all-important pale complexion. And to keep your face fresh, some coated their face with opium overnight, followed by a brisk wash of ammonia in the morning. For the woman with sparse eyebrows and eyelashes, mercury was often recommended as a nightly eye treatment. Please don't do this at home. Here's a picture of some Denver prostitutes. This kind of sums up their lives. So prostitution in Colorado was very much a women's game. The madams had the power. We did not have the pimps like they had back east. Women ran this game, but they were like gentlemen, like these two, and I mean use the term gentleman really loosely here. So there's two young guys back there, they're drinking, they got cigarettes hanging out of their mouths. They were like called macaron. And what they would do is they'd go to the train station and steer young girls into prostitution. So the poor girls would be coming in from the farm or the plains, and they'd be like, oh, do you need a job? Well, of course they did. Do you want to wear nice clothes? Of course they did. Prostitution, right? So what is so sad about this picture, and I still find it shocking, is in the 1880s, 70s, whatever, getting your picture taken was a big deal. So here they are, they're all dressed up, they got their fancy hats on and their fancy outfits they're probably in hock up to their eyeballs for. And as the photographer goes to take the picture, this guy grabs this woman's boob. So it's always like when there was any little piece of joy, somebody was always just right there to snatch it away from them. So, drugs. Laudanum, morphine, opium, marijuana, and cocaine. Many medicines contain from 17 to 44% alcohol. Like the real kind of alcohol, I'm hoping. Godfrey's cordial, Feely's pneumatic mixture, all had morphine. Laudanum is a liquid derivative of opium, often mixed with spirits. Morphine and glycerin cured sore throats. Morphine and cocaine cured nasal drip and hay fever. And opium did wonders for insomnia. Think about it. So I've been told that Leadville had the worst drug problem around, and that's because, you know, and I do believe this, but I did have to ask the stupid question, why? And they had all their buildings in that clapboard construction that, like, in the cold winter months, the wind just went straight on through it, so the drugs kind of helped take the edge off, right? And all of the stuff is really addictive. So here are the ladies of the Ryans family, which I wrote about, and I know their descendants, which turned out to be really funny because when the book came out, it got attention. Everything is great. All of a sudden, I started getting these emails going, are you part of our family? And I'm like, no, but I know some people who are. So all of a sudden, I kind of became like Ancestry.com for like this Ryan clan, you know? It's like, I know your cousins, so like, I hope they all did something. But one of them told me it was much harder to be number 2 than number 1. So Annie Ryan and this whole establishment, they were second-rate madams, but they were smart. So the old lady sitting down in the middle, her name is Mrs. Jane Elizabeth Ryan Wallace, whatever, her names would change. They had bars called Ryans and Wallaces. Julia was standing up on the left, Bona in the middle, and Annie became a prostitute and a madam in her own right. So they owned cribs, they owned brothels, they owned saloons where murders took place. They were smart enough, however, to hire off-duty cops to be their bartenders. They never tried to get their name in the newspapers, so some of these other ones would start be courting attention. They tried to stay out of it, and when they got in serious trouble, they bought the best lawyers money could buy. And it worked. So here's a picture of dealings with the law. So back to Denver being kind of corrupt. So all these women are paying all these fees. The girls have to pay a license fee to the city to be a prostitute. You get hauled in, you get fined for being a prostitute. All this money went straight into City Hall coffers, okay? So one day, or any day, when they thought that there wasn't enough money in City Hall, they'd be like, oh my God, do you know there's prostitution in Denver? And they'd be like, whoa. And then they'd go and they'd raid Market Street. And so they did one huge raid. Some of the women were so smart that they were in the back little cribs and they put for rent in the window and go running the other way and stuff like that. That was kind of good. But they all hauled them into jail. Well, that was a really bad thing because the women were still half dressed, half drunk. They didn't want coffee, they wanted beer and cigarettes. The poor jailers and police officers didn't know what to do with all these half-naked wild women. And by about like 2, silver platters started coming into the jail from like some of their associates. And by 5, they were all let go, all the fines were paid, and they all just went back to work like nothing ever happened. Causes of death, disease, suicide, drug overdose, and violence. So it wasn't a safe occupation. Here's one woman, I think this is an overdose. But here, let's go into Routt, Moffat, Grant County, depending on the year. So here's some pictures. The creation of Routt County, I think everybody knows this. It was created from the western portion of Grant County in 1877. The western portion of Routt County was split off and Moffat County was established in 1911. Hayden was the first county seat in 1877, but Hans Peak served as the county seat from 1877 to 1912. The railroad reached Steamboat Springs in 1908. That's when we started kind of getting prostitution in action and stuff up here. Steamboat Springs became the county seat in 1912. The population was 3,661 in 1900 and 7,561 in 1910. So during these years, there was a lot of change going on. My point with all of this is this part of the state is really remote. So when we talk about Denver, it's a city, it's got railroads, you know, people come in, people go out. It takes a lot more effort to get out here, right? So I've heard from some people who are very knowledgeable that the first prostitutes actually followed the strawberry field pickers. Now, I don't know, but I'm willing to believe that. Paul Bonnefield's like, no. I think
I would know.
You would know. Watch what you say. Anyhow, Routt County's heyday of vice really spanned from about 1902 to 1916. Prohibition in Colorado started in 1916 before the rest of the country. The popular saloons that had a bit of a shady reputation were Klein's Capital Bar. Anton Klein was the proprietor in 1908. Carrie Nation started, Carrie Nation, the bar or saloon, Carrie Nation, started as a temperance bar, but that wasn't catching on too well, so they changed over to liquor, and they kept the name. Gus Durbin was the owner of that in 1906. This was also associated with Ollie Patterson's boarding house, a known brothel. So up here already, they're being a little bit more genteel by calling things boarding houses. So I guess that's nice. The Mid Saloon and the Antlers, John Shorty Anderson was the proprietor at approximately 1909. He had a business relationship with Hazel McGuire, who was a known madam up here. Hazel was charged, and I think John was too, with white slavery. So depending on who you read, white slavery probably, in my opinion, wasn't really so much a real thing. I think all these women kind of entered into it voluntarily. But as the culture changed and we started getting a little bit more political or worried about appearances, white slavery was kind of a crusade to be against, which was really a means to shut down brothels and prostitution in many instances. It also probably operated, if it did, more in Denver. You'd see a lot of that in the Denver Post, and that was dealing with employment agencies back when unions were starting. So, Steamboat Springs Red Light District, Brooklyn. So when I started doing research here, I kept reading about Brooklyn Bridge, and I couldn't figure out why Steamboat was so interested about Brooklyn, New York. Well, I didn't quite get it. It's an area down that way, right? Got my directions right over kind of by the rodeo grounds and all that stuff down there. Steamboat Springs proper was dry. Census returns brothels as rooming houses, hotels, and rooming houses for girls up here. In 1909, Brooklyn had four known sporting houses. Prostitutes in the newspaper were called known women of Brooklyn, or inmates of Brooklyn. So prostitutes were called all sorts of names: Harridan, Sylph, Our Ladies of the Lamplight, I think that was a journalist, you know. Inmates was a really common name. Known woman, women of infamy, infamous, soiled dove. I mean, the list goes on and on. Local Scarlet Ladies. Ollie Patterson was born Iva Ethel Griffin. She was active in Route in 1905. Ollie Patterson was also the name of a Leadville madam killed in 1892. I don't know if the 1905 Ollie Patterson worked for the first murdered Ollie Patterson in Leadville, but once again, borrow a name, change an age, who knows. She plied her trade out of Guest Urban saloons, changed her name to Ethel McQuarrie by 1919. Hazel McGuire worked out of a rooming house tacked onto the back of the Mint. Shorty Anderson, proprietor. She came from Oak Creek to Steamboat, perhaps courtesy of Andy Black, who was a bartender who occasionally competed in the rodeo. So it's a kind of a different ballgame out here. Oak Creek, an area known as Hickory Flats, was a red light district home to prostitutes and bootleggers during Prohibition. Just because Prohibition happened in Colorado really didn't mean all liquor stopped, right? We know that. So there were stills and there was stuff going on anyhow. The Reedy Rooming House was located at Main Street and Bell Avenue, listed 2 women as prostitutes in the 1910 census. The Reedy Resort was ordered closed 1915 after DJ Reedy was found selling liquor in a dry coal mining district called Mount Harris. So it's kind of like, don't mess with, like, you know, the revenuers, and don't mess with the IRS, right? And here's just some last kind of happy pictures of a woman in one of those white brothel gowns I was talking about, and a happy woman who, you know, showing her legs and her boots on eBay. So I like that picture too. So, and here's some remaining traces. Those in the middle are some of the likenesses Jenny Rogers had carved and put on her building. They made duplicates of this, a group called the Westerners, and they used to sell them, you know, for money raising. So if anybody offers you one of these, I don't know, but find like a real appraiser or something to do. Up in Leadville, there is an old crib that's in the back of their town museum. A woman named Violet, she just had a bed, a stove, and a wash basin. That's what they had in cribs. And the House of Mirrors, like I said, Jenny Rogers' very famous and fancy brothel was still standing in 1942, and it is still, it used to be many different things, but it's serving alcohol again. And that's the end of my talk, if anybody has any questions.
Their money, and was that something that they worried about also? Was that safe?
I think they would like really hide it under floorboards. But here, you bring up a really, really good point. If you didn't become addicted to alcohol, if you didn't become addicted to drugs, if you knew how to save money, and if you were good at math, you too could become a madam. So she could probably, if she had a madam she trusted, leave the money with her. In Georgetown, Denver, probably Central City, probably up here, a lot of people had gold safes, like in the basements and the foundations of their buildings or elsewhere. So I mean, they did have places they could safely put it. I suppose you could open up a bank, but boy, that sounds pretty respectable to me. I don't know. Dealer's choice. Yeah?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people in this room remember in the 80s and 90s, there was a restaurant here called Patty Sills. I had no idea what went on.
Wasn't that though by like I-25? Oh, here? Oh, well there you go. I don't know that she came up here, but that's kind of cool. So thank you. Yeah.
Any idea how prevalent prostitution was in terms of the numbers? That is, we've seen the pictures of some of the individual madams, but how much was going on?
In Denver?
Yeah.
Well, okay, Denver and Leadville, I think they were like tied in a race, you know, so Leadville was just bonkers. They like had 2nd Street, they didn't care, they put it in the newspaper. Denver was trying to reform. You know, I really do see estimates of 1,000. I don't really believe that though, because you can look through the lists of who was working at what houses. Each house had about 4 women, 3 women, sometimes 7 or 8. So if there was 4 blocks in Denver that ran from 17th to 23rd, maybe it spilled over. I don't know. Any given time, I'd say 200. I don't know. That would just be my idea. And then up here, less. Leadville, they probably had the full 200, and they were just batshit crazy. Excuse the language. It's just like, you know, they were just happy people. Yeah.
What was going on in Denver in the early 1900s compared to the East Coast?
Compared to which coast?
To the East Coast.
Well, I think East Coast, like, I think all the reforms really started in the East Coast and kind of moved west, you know. I think, like, the women who wanted the vote, Carrie Nations, all this sort of stuff, they kind of started working this way. I would assume they were tamer, but then, you know, New York City, that is one whopping huge metropolitan. I mean, I don't know, you could be running anything out of basements there, and I think that's, you know, their police were probably crooked too. What really stopped a lot of this was our entrance into World War II, because what the government was really worried about was sending syphilitic soldiers overseas, so they really cut back. They really made it difficult. Yeah.
Just speaking of syphilis, did the madams do anything? You know,
Oh, yeah. They actually, like in Denver, women had to have a medical exam once a month. So they had doctors who would come into the brothels. I mean, I would presume they told the truth. And if a girl did get something, they would get sent to like a rest home till it got cleared up. Once you start going into the cribs though, where there isn't like the parlor house or the brothel, it gets really dicey, right? So that's why I'd say, I mean, if you're gonna do this, I would spend the money and go to the nicer place. So, yeah.
I saw an artifact in History Colorado featured. It was like the Denver Red Book that talked about
Yes.
resorts. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, so. Okay, there is something in Denver called the Red Books and the Blue Books, okay? In History Colorado, I got to hold that. They were so nice to me. You can look at the Red Books. When they would have conferences in Denver, golly, I don't know what the Red Book was for. Let's just say the Elks or something was coming into Denver. They would list all the houses of entertainment in this Red Book and hand them out to people. And so it'd say like, you know, Jenny's girls are all first class. Bill Bernard's, you know, we don't cut our whiskey. I mean, just all this stuff. Everything positively first class. First class for Denver is probably different than first class for New York. So, yeah, they blatantly advertised. Denver was wide open.
Pleasure resorts were sort of the beginnings of the ski resorts and all of our resort industry.
Now see, I'm going to defer to Candace on that one. So, okay, I'm going to use that. Thanks. Oh, sorry. She said the pleasure resorts, which is another euphemism for brothels, out in the mountains were a foundation for the resorts, the ski resorts, the outdoor entertainment resorts today in Colorado. So now you can all think about that. Yeah.
You mentioned that prostitution was licensed in Denver. So was it legal everywhere, and when did it become illegal?
It became illegal in 1916. Did that mean it stopped? No. It scattered out into the neighborhoods. Some of the people so the madams and the politicians worked very closely together. So if you paid a lot of money to your local politicians, you would find you could conduct business longer than your neighbor. And then I think Silverton, for example, way down southwest, last I heard they stopped about 1955. Leadville, they didn't want limited stakes gambling up there because they felt they had just gotten it cleaned up, so that's the 1980s. And that's coming out of the Pioneer building on 2nd Street, if you've ever been there. And so it really depended what little enclave you're in. There's prostitution today, you know, it's like, and it's illegal. So drinking, prohibition didn't really work. They just made their own stuff, which they were already doing with the creosote and the rattlesnake heads. So, you know, probably they got better. So, yeah. Okay, well, thank you. And once again, I apologize for last year.